Kevin Kirstel, happy Friday, TGIF, we made it. And today I'm with Tim Crawford, CEO extraordinaire. Tim, how are you?
Hey, Evan, great to see you. And it's been great to see you in person recently, too.
In person, always better than on these video chats, and particularly
Without a
with
doubt.
you. I really enjoy getting to know you, and it took many weeks, if not months, to get this video chat set up. So we're going to make really good time of this. I'm guessing most of my audience knows Tim Crawford, but for those few who perhaps don't, maybe introduce yourself and a little bit about your background to the viewers.
Yeah, thanks, Evan. So, Tim Crawford, I'm CIO and Strategic Advisor with Avoa, which is an advisory services and research firm based in Los Angeles. And I'm actually a former CIO myself and have led IT organizations most of my career. So I come to many of these conversations with a slightly unique perspective of being that customer. But today, see the world and see the perspective of many companies and how they compare and contrast against their contemporaries.
Yeah, I love that. And you are a true practitioner. You're not just on the soapbox, sort of observing. You've spent many decades with your hands in enterprise tech and IT. Tell us about your background a little bit, because you've worked for really who's who in the industry, and some really interesting companies. You learned a lot from those roles, I imagine.
You know, I've been honored to serve for a number of really prominent organizations, and in each of their times, each of their eras, they were typically number one or number two in their industry. So if you kind of go backwards, Konica Minolta, all covered. Before that, Stanford University, Knight Ridder, National Semiconductor, Philips Electronics. These were prominent and have been, continue to be prominent companies in, industries like semiconductors, publishing. I mean, Knight Ridder was the second largest publisher in the newspaper publisher in the United States at the time. And Stanford University, I think, goes without saying. I mean, it's either
Needs
number one or
no
number two,
introduction.
higher ed, depending on the particular year and who's writing the article. So, yeah, I've been honored to be exposed to these companies and work with a lot of really great people along the way. And the great thing about that is it's not just about me, but rather the people that I've learned from and the work that they've done. And
Mm.
then also what I've been able to contribute to that kind of hive, if you will, that learning process. And that's kind of a continuation of what I do today is still learning. I'm a continual learner, always curious. And so I'm trying to understand, how people are evolving and, sprinkling in my own expertise into that. But most of my time is spent with CIOs. And that's another piece that, you typically only see on the practitioner side of the house. But I'm a member of the Wall Street Journal's CIO network and take part in a number of CIO roundtables practically every week now, especially as we've moved to a virtual format. So I'm honored to have been able to experience this over the years and work with just some incredible people, even to the present day. So I'm looking forward to hopefully being able to continue that here into the future.
Oh, it's so fun when I'm reading the journal and all of a sudden your quote pops up and I'm like, yeah, I know him. It's always fun for the reader. But tell us about the last decade, let's say, focus on that aspect of your career. How has the CIO role changed or evolved the most in
You
your
know,
mind, through the pandemic to today?
Yeah, the CIO role has kind of, as you're alluding to, it's gone through an incredible transformation. We talk about technology transformation, we talk about business transformation, but the role of the CIO itself has gone through its own transformation and is continuing to do so. We have to remember that there were a lot of folks that were promoted to CIO that were either director of IT or VP of
Hmm.
IT, and they're ready for the next challenge. And so you have those caliber of folks, but then you also have folks that have been CIOs multiple times over for large enterprise and are incredibly strategic thinkers and looking forward into how they can leverage technology to really catapult their business. And these are two very different personas, but they're both titled CIO. And so
Mm.
it's important to understand that a CIO is not a CIO is not a CIO. But coming back to your question, what that means is as we've gone through the last 3 years, I mean, we've seen the prominence and need for the CIO to really kind of step up to the plate and play a much more prominent role in every company, whether you're the Main Street to Wall Street. It really doesn't matter. You have to step up. You have to think about where technology plays a role in your business. And so no longer is it just a technology play, but it's a business play. We just happen to be the translators. We as CIOs happen to be the translators in being able to connect the dots between business and technology. And
I
so
love that.
that's been something that's been in the works for a number of years, I'd say over the last decade or so. But definitely in the last 3 years during the pandemic, it's really kind of put a lot of kerosene in that fire to move things forward.
I totally get it. Um, and when it comes to your role, the CIO's role, how do you advise balancing that need for innovation and adopting leading edge technologies? We're going to talk about AI, obviously, but while maintaining the sort of the technical debt and the legacy that's built within any organization, that's quite a balancing act. Is that something you talk about a lot?
It is, and it's a great question, Evan. When you think about, well, let me use myself as an example.
Hmm.
I often say that I sit in the intersection of business and technology. I'm provocative, but pragmatic. And I think this is where every CIO, practicing operational CIO, needs to sit. You have to sit in that intersection of business and technology. You have to be provocative. You have to be able to move things forward. And I don't mean incrementally. I mean, understand how your company operates, understand how you spend money, how you make money, how your customers engage with you, how your employees engage in the process, how your business operations kind of cycle through that. You have to be able to help catapult your company and transform your company. But it's also important to understand where you are today. If you go back a few years, and I know you were involved in these conversations when cloud was really kind of coming onto the scene, and everybody's like, rah, cloud, all end with cloud. And even if I were a CIO that might agree, okay, cloud is great and the best thing since sliced bread, the reality is I'm still back here. And how do I get from here to there? And so the CIO today needs to understand that. And so I think it's important to put some reality into the conversation and understand where these new innovative technologies will fit or not. And that's the other piece to this, is that technology is not the answer for everything. It's not the for the person that has a hammer, everything's a nail. It doesn't work that way anymore. And so we as CIOs have to kind of change our thinking such that we can understand the value, and I'll underscore value there, the value that technology plays and where it appropriately plays and how it appropriately plays. And that's a pretty marked shift in the thinking from even just in the past 5 to 10 year cycle.
Oh, that's a great point. And you're a great communicator, clearly. And that's a challenge for many folks with technical backgrounds. We're kind of geeks. We're IT enthusiasts, not necessarily focused on communications. But how does a CIO advocate internally for priorities and talk to boards, talk to the executive teams? I mean, what strategies did you use to build your communications chops over the decades?
Well, I mean, first and foremost, let's be honest. I got tripped up too. I've always been that nerd, that oddball. But I can also remember a few decades ago having conversations in one of the companies, which I'll leave unnamed, and asking, so we're doing X with technology. how does that impact our business? Really kind of here's that curiosity kind of showing up. But how does that impact our business? What does it touch into the business? I want to learn. And being told at the time, it doesn't matter, just do it, right? Fast forward to today, now you really do need to understand how that change kind of fits in. And for the CIO, I think that starts with relationships. It starts with relationships with the rest of the C suite. I mean, if you really truly want to operate at the chief information officer level and be seen as a peer, you must have the right tone and cadence to
Mm.
engage with the rest of the C-suite, whether it's the CFO, the CIO, I'm sorry, the COO, the CMO, the CEO. One of the strongest relationships as a CIO that you can have is with the CEO. And that's for a couple of reasons. That's not to exclude the CMO or CFO or COO out of that equation, but it's really important to build that relationship in a way that they understand. This is not technology jargon coming out in the conversation. It's getting to know these people, what makes them tick, how they operate. It's building relationships. That's something that for a lot of IT leaders can be kind of a strange feeling. I mean, we
Mm.
work very well within our organization, but externally, maybe not so much. But if you want to ascend to truly being seen as a peer, this is exactly what you have to do. You have to understand the business and how the business runs at the same level as the CEO. And the other reason why you do that is if you then want to ascend to the next tier, which is engagement with your board of directors, the CEO is the doorway to the board. The CEO
Mm.
is not going to pull you into a board meeting if you have that traditional IT geekness that you're going to bring into the conversation, because the board members are going to get frustrated. The eyes are going to roll back in their head and they're going to go, okay, why are we wasting our time here? Because they don't
Mm.
understand it, and nor really should they. You have to be able to understand your audience. You have to be able to engage at that level. And these are all kind of steps along the journey of leadership that you have to proceed with. And many CIOs are trying to figure out how exactly to do that. It's no longer just, hey, how do I get a seat at the table? You have to earn a seat at the table. And then once you do get a seat at the table, you have to keep earning it. Every day
Mm.
you have to keep earning it, because it could likely come out from underneath you and you're sent to the back of the room. So I do think that relationships are key. Understanding, watching body language, understanding how people operate, what their motivations are, putting yourself in their shoes. So using that outside in perspective rather than inside out. I've heard CIOs in conversation of, oh, well, our board needs to be more technologically savvy, and that's our real problem. And it's like, well, that might be true, but that's not the starting point. And if you come out, shooting with that perspective, you're not going to get very far. The good thing is we're seeing another shift happen, which is many boards are starting to consider an extension of their what traditionally has been an audit committee to creating a technology and risk committee within the board. And so technology comes into the boardroom in the sense of innovation and some of that forward thinking, but then it also comes up in terms of risk. And it's not just cybersecurity and ransomware, but we also have to think about things like technical debt. So it is something that is starting to come together from multiple angles. But I do think the CIO can help kind of catapult and lead that through some of these methods. And frankly, this is one of the things that I coach CIOs with, and those that are aspiring to be CIOs, is what are the ways they can build those relationships to prepare them for CIO service, and eventually maybe even for board service, to serve on a board, because we are
Mm.
seeing more CIOs that are being invited to apply for board positions. And that's a great opportunity, but not every CIO is cut out for it. I was at the Wall Street Journal CIO Summit, and I was presenting on this very issue. And I said, look, and this is talking to some very prominent CIOs that were in the room. And I said, look, many of you may be thinking about how you can achieve board service. So get yourself ready to serve on a board. But I got to be honest, you need to ask yourself, is that really what is best for you?
Hmm.
Because it sounds prominent, but there are risks that come with it too, and you may not be cut out for it. So, you know, as with anything, I think you have to have an honest conversation about this and think about all the different permutations that come with it. It's not a straight line.
Yeah, such great advice. And you do mentoring and coaching personally for CIOs as well as advisory work?
I do. Yeah,
Mm.
it wasn't you go back to what I said, earlier in the conversation of, I'm honored to have kind of stepped into some of these companies. I'm honored to have been asked to be a coach to a number of CIOs and some of their direct reports too. Um, these are good people. These are people that are incredibly smart, but might be missing, a little tick here or there.
Hmm. Hmm.
Or in some cases, they got their stuff together, but just want that validation that, okay, I'm ready for this. I'm ready for whatever the next thing is. It might even be another CIO role, might be in a different industry or a bigger role, a bigger CIO role. So yeah, it's been an honor to be able to serve in that capacity, and be invited to serve in that capacity. Um, yeah, and it's been great to see some of these folks then ascend to be CIOs themselves. So, if you're, for example, I can think of some folks that they were ready for their next leadership role, and ready for their first CIO position, and it's just great to see some of those folks actually achieve that today.
Oh yeah, wonderful, wonderful mission. So, like all of us, you've talked a lot recently about economic headwinds and right sizing, downsizing. It's the this year of efficiency, and you talk a lot about IT budgeting. What's your approach when it comes to strategy around investing in new technologies while maintaining that legacy infrastructure, and how to navigate, frankly, difficult time?
How much time do you have? I mean, that's the answer, quite frankly, is complicated and it's unique to each organization. But here
Mm.
are some things to look out for. We call it FinOps today. Uh, it was budgeting decades ago, but you have to think about what's relevant to your business. We have to have an honest conversation about that because we've heard about slush funds, we've heard about all these experimentation and pet projects. I think the days of those types of things are behind us. Now today, as long as it ties as closely to revenue as possible, you really have little to worry about. But you've got to get it. You've got to get whatever efforts you're doing as close to revenue as possible, or business efficiency. One end or the other, top line, bottom line, right? If you're looking at it from a financial standpoint, um, those relationships that I was talking about really help in being able to understand how your business operates, what's motivating for each of these different folks, and ensuring that you're tying what your organization is doing to what those folks need. Um, all of these come into play. I think if I were to maybe look at that in the current light, with the current macroeconomic conditions, this year we've heard a lot about folks cutting budgets. And this is one of the things that gets to be a little bit of a misnomer is, yes, externally you will hear that organizations are definitely cutting budgets. The reality is most of them are actually just deferring their spend. They're not actually
Mm.
cutting the budget. And so again, this is where kind of that inside baseball starts to bubble out. Um, and what that means is that hopefully, if we see an improvement in the macroeconomic conditions, not just in the U.S. here, but globally, start to improve maybe through the second into the third quarter, then folks would have that spend available to open up the tap and continue on. Unfortunately, as we've all seen, we're continuing down this kind of treacherous path. And so I do think that once we hit Q3, if we haven't seen a market shift in the direction of the indicators, we can fully expect that those budgets will actually be cut, not just deferred. And so externally, you won't see that because they've already stopped the spend or reduced the
Hmm.
spend. But what that means is then as we do come out of the economic situation, whether it's Q4, whether it's next fiscal year, it's going to be harder for them to get that money back to be able to ramp back up. So it's going to be a slower growth cycle the longer we go through this. And we've heard this from economists as well on the whole. But within IT, you'll also see something very similar. That being said, where the money is getting spent, as I mentioned, is those projects that are transformational to the business, that are most closely related to revenue, which means things related to data, customer engagement, employee engagement, business efficiency. If you can focus on those aspects, that will give you some clear indication of where you can get support for spend and where you should probably consider cutting too. And look for those areas. Use this opportunity. They always say, never let a good crisis go to waste.
Hmm.
This is an example of that. We have to find ways to leverage that in a positive way. And I think you can leverage that to say, look, we just don't have the funds to do this, and this particular project or effort or licensing that we have, you know what? It's not really producing a lot from a revenue standpoint or from an efficiency standpoint. Let's get rid of it. So portfolio pruning is something that should be happening within every IT organization on a regular basis. The reality is it isn't done on a regular basis, but we should be doing that right now.
Great advice. I was just, as you're speaking, looking at your newsletter, the CIO in the Know on LinkedIn, a weekly newsletter. I'd encourage folks to subscribe to it. I do. You have you talk about the CIO water cooler talk and the topics that are top of mind. Do we still have water coolers in offices? I don't know. I haven't been in an office so long. I don't know if they're still there. But we all get the point. I mean, hybrid is top of mind. Generative AI, you can't avoid that. You talk a little bit about data quality, which is really interesting. You don't hear about the need for healthy, high quality data much as a exciting topic. Um, Talk about some of the topics that you hear again and again, day in, day out, and what's your take on one or two of them from your unique
Yeah, sure.
perspective?
But help me out here. How do you spell AI again? um, yeah, data and AI are probably two of the most widely discussed topics right now. Um, and the reason for that is because if you go back to what I was saying, understanding customer engagement, understanding employee engagement, understanding business operations, you can't do that without data. And so data becomes the foundation for the insights that help you make good business decisions and help you understand. Like, if we just kind of pick apart the customer piece of it, that's what helps you understand your customers more intimately. This is more than just personalization, by the way. This is really kind of getting to the heart of who is Evan Kirstel? How does Evan think? What drives Evan? Ironically, it's kind of similar to what I was saying about relationships with other executives, right? But you have to really kind of dig into that data. And so data quality becomes a problem. Do we trust the data? Do we think it's accurate? What can we glean from it? What can we learn from it? But then the next step of that is you start to realize that, oh my God, like, there is so much data that we have at our fingertips. And I'm just talking about what's within the four walls of our enterprise, not even talking about access
Mm.
to external data, which adds a whole nother element to this conversation. How do you trust that data and ensure that you have good data hygiene, and really understand and can leverage it in a meaningful way? Because you're going to make core business decisions off of that data. And if that data is inaccurate, you're making bad decisions,
Mm.
right? And so there's a downstream effect, and it's a multiplier effect too, by the way. When you look at these huge sums of data, you start to very quickly realize that you can't just apply regular analytics to the mix and say, okay, I want this and that, and put it together, and maybe I make a decision. I mean, that's the old school way of doing it. We need to infuse automation into the the mix, right? We need an advanced way of managing and assessing and gleaning insights from data. And this is really where the conversation of artificial intelligence comes in. Now, let's call a spade, right? Most of what you see in the marketplace today has nothing to do with artificial intelligence. It's a marketing thing, right? It's a branding
Smoke and
thing.
mirrors. Yes, I know a little bit about marketing.
Yeah. It's just that it's more like machine learning than it truly is artificial intelligence, because it really doesn't have that cognitive piece, that piece that you and I and the listeners have, right? Of being able to look at something and go, that doesn't look quite right. Something's not right there. There's a cognitive piece that the human condition brings into the equation that computers don't today. That being said, artificial intelligence, or let's just use the term, artificial intelligence that many of the companies are infusing into data tools today really help us govern, apply policies to, ensure that data is used in an appropriate way, but then also can help drive us toward certain insights and outcomes so that we can make good business decisions. Fast forward to the latest piece, which is generative AI. And for those that aren't familiar with generative AI, it essentially, in a very simple way, it's essentially analytics. So just like you would do today, where you're analyzing data for a specific outcome, you ask a question, you get an output, but then that output becomes an input for the next iteration of this process. And that's the generative piece. So 1 + 1 = 3. Well, now 3 becomes an input for the next time that someone asks a question. And that's essentially the multiplier effect that comes to play with generative AI. The problem with this is what happens if one of those inputs is bad data? Now you got the multiplier where it becomes an output, which then becomes a derivative, which then becomes a multiplier. And so it's a concern because there's no way to tie back to the original source of the data. So for example, if let's say further down the pike, you go, something's not right here, right? The human comes into play and it's like, this isn't right. Can we tie this back to the original source of the data? You can't. And so that's one of the concerns that comes alongside of things like generative AI. The other piece is just who owns the intellectual property for this, right? These are based off large language models. You've probably heard of LLMs. And so those LLMs and that training is built on a set of data. Well, whose data is that it's built on top of? And who owns the rights to that? And then if there's a derivative, if there's an output of it, who owns that output? And we see this coming up in code creation right now. But you can be certain that we will see this ending up in the courts in very short order. And so one of the ways that enterprises are trying to kind of hedge against it, if you will, because I don't want this to be just doom and gloom. There's some great things about this technology. But one of the ways that enterprises are kind of trying to put the guardrails in place is by saying, let's just use our enterprise data. Let's not bring in public data that is untested. We really don't know where it's come from. And so it's a way to create some degree of trust in data. The CEO of Talend used to talk about this a lot, Crystal Beaumont, about the importance of trust in data. And she was absolutely right. We have to trust our data because that's what we're betting our business on. That's what we're making these decisions to be able to move forward on. So my point to this is use these technologies, but understand what the risks are and put the appropriate guardrails in place. I do think that, if we were to kind of play this out a bit, I don't think that we'll see enterprises using like ChatGPT and some of the core generative AI capability in a naked form, in a Lego building block form. I actually think that the way that enterprises will consume this, if we were to kind of fast forward the clock a little bit, is where it's built into core applications, right? We were both at the Zoho event recently.
Hmm.
You see it built into Zoho, for example. I was just at SAP Sapphire, see it built into SAP's pillars. And I would expect other vendors to do the same thing. And then that becomes a much more palatable way to consume this innovation by enterprises without having to build a center of excellence around it within their organization. And so this is part of that water cooler conversation that's happening among CIOs right now, which is great. I see the opportunity, but I'm a little scared about the risks that come along with it, right? And things are moving super, super fast, which generally isn't a good thing because you could end up, getting out on a limb before you even realize it. And the problem today is we just have so much more at risk, right? It's so easy for a company to make a mistake or get stuck somewhere and the customer switches to their competitor, right? The switching
Yeah.
costs are much lower. So all of these come into play. And so I would encourage folks to definitely find ways to leverage some of this new innovation because everybody is doing it. And if you're not, you're going to fall behind very quickly. But be smart about it. Think about the guardrails. Think about where those are appropriate to put in place.
Great advice. Um, so as we wrap up here, I am curious if you have any advice, suggestions to CIOs who are interested in putting out a more public persona. You're obviously pretty prolific when it comes to content creation and podcasting and tweeting and posting. You're out there everywhere, and many CIOs, see that as an opportunity for career advancement and visibility and new opportunities. What's your advice to them for getting out there on the platforms and being more vocal externally, and any dangers they need to watch out for, any roadblocks that you've seen as increasingly CIOs are getting on social media?
Yeah. It's a great question, Evan. And, first and foremost, you do have to think about your brand. You have to think about the Tim Crawford brand, the Evan Kirstel brand. As a CIO, that's incredibly important. If you work for a tech company, that's even more important because you're likely talking with other CIOs that are asking you, okay, say you work for Acme Company. I'll, make this a little more generic.
I
But
used to work
let's
for
say,
Acme Packet, so yes, that was actually the
right, work for
but
Acme Packet. So
generic
there
is
you go.
fine.
But you might be engaging with other CIOs that might be buyers of your company's technology.
Mm.
And so they're looking for advice. They want to trust that, okay, maybe this isn't the individual that's responsible for the product, but they want some of that inside baseball. They want to know that, hey, there's a good persona that is engaged with the same company, even if they aren't the one that's leading the charge on the innovation and the product development itself. You have to think about your brand from that perspective, but you also have to think about it for your next opportunity and also what it represents both externally and internally within the organization. So externally to your customers, externally to your partners and ecosystem, and internally to your employees and even prospective employees, not just within IT, but also outside of IT. And again,
Mm.
if you're a technology company, even more so, right? Because we have the situation today where people are choosing whether they work for company A or company B based on what the company stands for. What does the company offer? And if you're giving them, a 10-year-old laptop to work on, that's not going to go very far, very fast, right? But if you're giving them newer technology to work on, it's going to be exciting and you're going to attract the top talent to your organization. Because let's face it, today, you can't just pay for the top talent. You have to find other clever ways to attract that, whether you're in IT or whether it's talent outside of IT. And your brand matters as part of that process and building those relationships. IT and CIOs as a profession, it's a team sport.
Mm.
It's absolutely a team sport. No longer is it that, hey, and I'm not sure it ever was just an individual sport, but today CIOs congregate because they're trying to share insights, and sometimes it's just knowing, hey, you know what, I'm not alone. I'm not the only one that has X issue or Y problem, or I'm looking at Z innovation. And sometimes you'll have situations where you'll be collaborating with folks in your same industry, but what you're doing is not differentiating for your company versus your competitor. So you see this even in financial services, where folks are saying, hey, how can we work together to make us all better? um, your brand plays a role in that. Your reputation plays a role in that. And if you're not thinking about your brand and how you get your brand out there, whether it's posting your perspective on LinkedIn, on different things that are happening, sharing your expertise, those are safe ways to expose your brand and what you stand for. You do need to stay true to what your brand is. So don't turn those posts into like a Facebook post of, hey, and I, went to this fairgrounds and went to this World's Fair. Keep it professional. Keep your
Mm.
brand professional. Leave Facebook for that. But
Yeah.
I think that the other piece that you brought up, which is also incredibly important, is you are an extension of your company. So
Mm.
you also have to be very cognizant of what you post, whether you can put in there, views are not representative of my company. It's crap. I mean, people see you as an extension of your company or the company you work for. And so you always have to gauge what's appropriate to share. And is this something that my company would have a problem with me sharing or not? And so there is that kind of balance you have to strike too. But managing your brand, having a coach to help you through that, getting more prominent. I've worked with CIOs and coached them along this process. And sometimes it's simple little things, but once they get going with it, they get it. They get it. And then it becomes kind of an engine and you create the flywheel that helps you kind of build on top of that.
And it's so fun and rewarding once you really start to connect and
It
engage. It really, there are amazing people out there on
There
social
are.
media, despite all the downside and the negativity. There's so much upside.
You do have to balance that because there are a lot of folks, especially in IT, that
Mm.
they're more introverted versus
Mm.
extroverted. And so if you are more and know this about yourself, that you're more of an introvert versus an extrovert, this can be hard. This can be
Mm.
really hard and uncomfortable to put yourself out there. But there are techniques and ways to kind of go down that path and build up that muscle memory, and reduce that discomfort as you go forward.
Fantastic. Well, just to wrap up, any travel coming up worth mentioning? Any events that people might be able to connect with you at, or
Oh
what's
man,
happening in
I've
your world the next few weeks or months?
yeah, I have travel every week. I was just
Mm.
looking at the calendar, and every week I'm somewhere. So yeah, if you're going to be somewhere, an enterprise software, hardware services, CIO, even CIO summits. Next week. I'm at the Qualcomm CIO summit,
Oh
and
wow,
then I have
very cool.
some industry events coming up and some CIO events coming up. But yeah, I'd love to connect with you and kind of hear your perspective. And like I said, I'm always up for learning. I don't have all the answers, but it's great to learn from other folks.
All right. Well, on that high note, thanks everyone for watching. Thank you, Tim, for sharing your
Thank you for having me.
insights and tremendous opportunities ahead for us in this industry. So, thanks for what you do, and thanks for watching, everyone. Have a great Friday. Have a great weekend.
Bye bye.